That's right, kiddos. It's time to return to Final Fantasy XIII and build another monster from the iconic game that we have already established as
one ring to rule them all.
And if you're not a Final Fantasy XIII fan, well, this whole video is going to sound and look like this. We're going to make a Seath monster today. What's a Seath, you ask? Well, here's a dramatic example. We will be making the Seath out of clay because I need the practice and I have not a clue on how to do it any other way. But let's start with building a rough body out of tinfoil. Oh, Clay Miku has something to say. Okay, not sure what that was about. Moving on, I started with a tinfoil base to save on clay. No in-depth look on how to get this shape because I just made it up. And you could do the same at home. Make up whatever shape Seath you want. Next, I use this wire to form what I'm calling his three-fingered club hand. Right now it looks like he has two badly shaped wings for arms, but I wanted to wrap the wire fingers with the tin foil like this. For his left arm, I wanted to resemble the gross version of a normal human arm, so the anatomy is correct-ish. Okay, his core is done, and I decided on a hunch forward look. The pose will be more clear once I add his head later. Time to face the clay, boys. This is just standard oven-baked clay. I believe it's called Original Sculpey. The point to this layer is just to cover everything up with clay. A note on the fingers. I made them very square because of Square Enix. Now, cause Seaths are very squarely boys, so I cut out squarer rectangle shapes for about 90% of the whole build. I blended the fingers into the arm using a sculpting tool, or is it a nail art tool? I don't know. With the skin on, I went ahead and baked it, and bruh. Yeah, this is what happens when you use a easy bake oven, kids. This isn't a disaster or anything, the clay is just a little singed. It will be okay. Looking at the various types of Seaths in the game, they all have these square column bits coming out of them, so let's do that next. I cut several square-like shapes and started building the stone boy starting on his back and working down the right arm. Speaking of right stub, I took longer shaped clay bits and wrapped them around said stub and blended them smooth, which I did an infinite amount of times in this build. And this is what it looks like after baking. It's nowhere near finished, but baking in stages is always a smart practice when sculpting. It's like the typewriter in Resident Evil. And yes, I cannot go one video without mentioning Resident Evil in some way. Next, I did basically the same thing to the left arm that I did for the right arm. Very exciting. For the chest, it's usually where the Seath eye is, and if you didn't know, the eye is the brand that l'Cie get their power from. I'm bringing this up because it's a mandatory detail that you have to add if you're going to make a Seath. I made my Seath brand out of circle shapes that get bigger as they go outward, if that makes any sense. As for the lower half of the Seath's body, it was just more square shapes that we've already seen, so let's skip it and go on to something more interesting, like making the head. I started by carving out a slot for the head that is going to be played by this ball. But it's not a ball. It's actually a plastic skull.
It's me, Mario!
I temporarily stuck the skull in place and wow, the Seath suddenly looks a lot more menacing now. Why is it that rebuilds can't sculpt anything cute or happy? His skill is only in creating monsters. But I like monsters, so it's okay. I built the neck around the piece of plastic, but I noticed that it was too long, so I cut the back of the skull off. And yes, Rebuild is a certified skull surgeon. I returned the now trimmed head to its final resting place, then I rebuilt the neck. At this point, you're probably wondering how I'm going to bake this now that it has a piece of plastic embedded in it. Well, I don't actually know. I forgot that plastic hates heat. But I do know that most plastics that are used for toys have a melting point of 260 something degrees Fahrenheit. So I baked my boy for 20 minutes at 250, and it worked perfectly. But I still wouldn't do it again though, or suggest that you do it either. After the clay monstrosity was baked, he was way too smooth and sharp looking. So I roughed him up a bit with my knife. All this texture will show up nicely after painting. Speaking of paint, let's paint. I primed it in black, then I picked out some colors that matched this Seath's color scheme, which is purple. I started, however, with khaki. I only applied this color to the head, chest, inner thighs, and hands. Next, I used a very dark purple and applied it where the khaki ended. This was my attempt to create a gradient. Then I took this lighter shade of purple and dry brushed it over all the purpley parts. Okay, painting is done and I'm quite happy with it, which is a rare feeling since I don't like most of the things I paint because I'm not that good at it. Now I was originally going to paint the brand red and call it a day, but I remembered I had this stuff. I'm going to use this UV resin mold to make a jewel and use it for the Seath's brand. I chose this one for no important reason whatsoever. I wanted a red jewel, so I busted out my red alcohol ink and mixed up a bloody mess. But don't pass out on me or you'll miss the pour action, which is oddly satisfying to watch for some reason. Once cured, we could demold it. And yeah, I may have put a little too much UV resin in the mold, but after a quick trimming and sanding, the Seath was ready to be branded. No, not let's go Brandon, let's go brand him. Okay, it looks great, but I still had some red UV resin left over, so I added more resin around the brand just to spice it up a bit. With the last drops of the resin, I spookified him by giving him a resin eyeball. At first I was only going to do one eye, but nah, 2 eyes are best. And somehow he's gotten even more terrifying with those creepy glossy red eyes. It's like he's staring right into your soul, telling you to push that subscribe button now. Okay, we're back after a week of hiatus. Well, a week for me, a half second for you. I was sick with a sinus infection, which I get sometimes in the spring, but we're back now and ready to make a base for our Seath. The base will be played by this takeout container, or at least the top will. It's the perfect shape and size, but it requires a bit of sanding. After sanding, it was ready for its makeover. But what is that even going to be? Well, let's go play Final Fantasy XIII to get some inspiration. Today's build sends us to the Yashida Massifa. Hold on, let's have Susie AI pronounce it.
Yashis Massif Padraian Archaeopolis.
There we go. I love this area because it shows a glimpse of what society once looked like on Grand Pulse. You know, before the communists made a mess out of everything. Okay, let's head down for a closer look. I see distressed concrete, grassies, and some dirt. This rusty old spotlight calls out to me. Gah, look at this game. 13 years old and it still looks great. This game just brings me to a state of wonder every time I play it. Okay, we have our inspiration. The base will have distressed concrete, dirt, grass, and something rusty. Starting with the concrete, I traced out the base shape on some ready board. Wow, perfect circle. I cut it out, then chopped it up into a more exciting shapes. And yeah, that looks like distressed foam, but it needs some texturing, and we'll use a tinfoil ball to give us that much needed texturing. Okay, with that done, let's glue them on the base. I'm using a 2-glue method, tacky glue being our main glue, and then hot glue to keep the pieces on while the PVA glue dries. As you can see, I glued one piece at a slight angle upwards just to emphasize the distressed look a bit. Also, we're going to hold off on gluing this piece for now. We move on to Mod Podging the foam, then base coating it in a dark gray color. I took a lighter gray and dry brushed it on the base. Dry brushing is a method of painting where you wipe most of the paint off the brush before applying it. By doing this, you can help retain the dark base coat or something like that. I don't know. I'm not a very good painter. The last thing I did was add a highlight on just the raised edges on the concrete with a very light gray. This is how it came out, and I was happy. It looks like distressed concrete, and that's all we need. Next on the list is the dirt. I mixed up some dirt and PVA glue, which is my go-to method whenever I require dirt. I applied the dirt thusly. It looks great, but I made a mistake on not taping off the edge, because I wanted to keep it smooth for painting, but you know, oh well. I didn't like how clean the concrete looked, so I mixed up a black wash and added it. And wow, that was too dark. Let's wipe that off and try again with a lot more water added to the wash. Yeah, that's much better. I realized I should have added the black wash before adding the dirt because it turned some of the dirt black, but too late now. Grassy time. I'm using just standard flocking I got from the hobby store, and I applied it to the areas I thought looked good and where I believed that grass would grow. I could have added more flocking, but I thought it looked good with just a taste of greenery. Okay, time is running out, so let's move on to making that spotlight. Oh, Clay Miku wants to say something again.
When I look into all of your stupid faces, I think of how much fun it will be to pound them into dust.
Okay, she clearly needs a timeout right now. The stoplight wasn't anything special. I just took a foam rectangle shape like this, and then I added some yogurt scrap plastic. Then I used big straw and made the light, covers, I guess they're called? Light covers? I don't know what they're called. For the pole, I used this caramel apple stick. It's crude and simple, but it worked, and we had our stoplight. I painted it in rust colors that matched the game, and it was ready to be glued right here in an exciting bent pose. The last thing I did was paint the base line a nice Final Fantasy XIII pink metallic. But I didn't end up liking that pink, so I changed it to copper instead, which I think looks a lot better. Once I added the seeth to the base, we were done and we could roll those somber glamour shots.
Let me tell you a story about the Dark Stranger. He was once just a small child who played and laughed among his fellows within the village of Restford. He was happy and without care, as were the rest of the villagers in their quiet fairy tale home. But all was not right. The village's only purpose was to market their Fal'Cie's new products. The Dark Stranger was turned into a l'Cie, cursed by the Fal'Cie Square Enix to follow a focus by their design. One that, if completed, the l'Cie would then turn to crystal and gain eternal life. But if not completed, they would be cursed to wander Grand Pulse as a monster for all eternity. What was the Dark Stranger's focus? He was tasked with bringing Final Fantasy XIII, a new and exciting take on a more or less dull and lifeless franchise, to the fanbase. A deceptionally simple task indeed. However, try as he did, he was ruthlessly turned away by the fanbase. They were not interested in a new IP, they only desired a remake of the largely inferior 7 game. The Dark Stranger failed to bring Final Fantasy XIII into the hearts of the fan base. He was turned into a Seath and branded the name Dark Stranger, or Doyle for short. For 13 years, Doyle has wandered the wilderness as his monstrosity, seemingly with no hope. But there is hope for Doyle still. His fal'Cie Square Enix still remains, and they can free him from his monstrous prison. They just have to port Final Fantasy XIII to the new consoles. By doing this, Doyle, through various bylaws, will be free of his affliction and gain eternal life. Only then can this poor soul rest. So I beseech you, great fal'Cie Square Enix, end this poor soul's suffering. You have the power, you just have to open your heart. Do it for your dying franchise, do it for your fans, do it for the Dark Stranger. Hashtag do it for Doyle.
Oh, you're still here. Well, thank you for watching. If you liked this video, give it a like. If you haven't already, press that subscribe button. I hope you enjoyed this Final Fantasy XIII video, because I know I did. And I hope you liked Doyle's little story. I wrote that mess myself, and I thought it came out pretty alright. Final Fantasy XIII will always be my favorite game of all time, and it's not me trying to be a troll or anything. I truly love this game, and if you asked me what are the best 3 Final Fantasy games of all time, these would be my top 3 picks. I have never met or talked to another Final Fantasy XIII fan before, but I know you're out there, and I hope you enjoyed this video, because it was basically just me simping over this largely forgotten game. Okay guys and gals, always be kind and rewind, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.